Hello and welcome to another edition of the Tigers Down Under, the first part of our season review. We'll have a second part out that should be available for you to listen to or watch right after this one. We're releasing both of them at the same time. But for the first part, I have with me Logan. How are you?
Hey, Alex. Yeah, mate, doing pretty well. It's nice to, I guess, catch our breaths at the end of the season and, reflect on what was a pretty interesting season, but also, I guess, start to look forward now that all of the hoorah of the playoffs and all that kind of stuff's on, and we know, who's going to be in the league next year, and we can start to kind of, develop our prospects and thoughts and stuff on next season.
Absolutely, and yeah, that is the reason we sort of delayed the review of the season until after the playoffs had finished, so we know that Sheffield Wednesday have obviously been promoted. We know that Luton have been promoted to the Premier League as well. So we do know who the 24 teams in the Championship will be for next season, which does make it a pretty interesting league. Of course, we also know who's been relegated from the Premier League as well. So we've got Leeds back in the league. We've got Leicester and Southampton as well. But yeah, look, as you sort of started there, maybe we'll start things off with is just having a look back on the season that was. As you said, I mean, it was a pretty strange season in a way. Started with a lot of promise, a lot of excitement, a lot of new signings. Under the management of Shotter, got a pretty exciting win on the first day of the season against Bristol City with the last-minute goal from Seri. And it all sort of petered out a little bit under Shotter and then, of course, rejuvenated somewhat under Rosenia when he came in. But I'd sort of tend to say, and looking ahead to reflecting on our preseason predictions as we did, where I think all three of us, yourself, Dan, and myself, all thought that we'd finish top half. I think you were even more ambitious and said top 10. So from that perspective, how do you reflect on the season as a whole? Do you see it as a disappointment, or do you see it as really strong foundation blocks in place?
Yeah, I guess it's an interesting one because as the season progressed, I think, like every season, your expectations change pretty quickly. And it's kind of, I was thinking about this before we went to air. I forgot how quickly we kind of got out of the blocks and, the first like 5 or 6 games, we looked like an incredible outfit. We were winning the close games. We were knocking off the big teams. And even in the performances that weren't exactly what you'd describe as convincing, we were kind of snatching results and getting goals. So when I think about that level of the season, I started off optimistically thinking, top 10 and then I started to think, oh, wait, hold on a second. Like anything short of playoffs will start to, be a bit short considering how quickly the optimistic football fans, viewpoint can change. And then, it wasn't until around Christmas time where we found ourselves kind of, tinkering on the edge of that relegation zone. So it changed really quickly. And then I guess the second half of the season can, just be described as, whilst it wasn't exactly, overwhelming with results as far as the wins that came, there were certainly some very positive performances, and we look like a much more, I guess, stable and identified side under Rosenia. And so I think when we look back and see that we finished 15th, I mean, it's really easy to forget how much of a turbulent journey parts of the season were. It probably, sounds about right where we finished up, given that, as I said, that Christmas patch where things were looking rather grim. But it just really felt like, just around the tail end of the mid-table places probably was a fair assessment of the season as a whole. And if anything, it's left us with a large amount of optimism heading into next season. So I'd say that it's about right.
Yeah, only one loss in our first 6 games was a pretty fast start to the season, and we'll talk a bit later on about what our favourite game of the season. But As you said there, you got the win over Norwich as a relegated side, the 3-2 win over Coventry, where Oscar got his hat trick, and as I mentioned, the 2-1 win over Bristol City on the opening day. There was some pretty exciting wins to start off the season, and it was amazing how quickly it all sort of unraveled in that patch from the end of August until the end of September, where we were conceding for fun, basically. And I think, going back to talking about our preseason predictions, when we talked about what our red flag for the early months of the season would be, or what our biggest concern would be, and I think mine was if we started conceding a lot of goals, because that was sort of our strength last season, rather than having out-and-out goal scorers. And whilst we certainly started scoring a lot more goals with Oscar going nuts to start the season, we were certainly shipping a lot of goals as well, which ultimately cost Shota his job. We basically, it was quite crazy, because we had Dawson come back in for about a month, and then Rosenior as well. So we've had a taste of a couple of favourite sons coming back to manage the club, and you sort of reflect on the sacking of Shota on, I think it was basically the morning of that game against Luton, and you just think back to the fact that was just after, I want to say that was just after an international break, and you think it was a bit of an odd timing why it wasn't done a bit sooner, to give Dawson a bit of time to prepare, but also the club and the players and everyone else. That was probably one of those moments where you think, oh, it's a bit of a concern in terms of Ajun's judgment in terms of timing for that sort of thing. But it was a bit of a turbulent patch. But then it also, and of course, then there was the almost appointment of the manager, whose name I've completely forgotten, which was very highly publicized, and then that didn't carry through. And then it was Rosenior's appointment, and it all sort of settled down again, as you said, and we started to see, a distinct style of play under Rosenior. But that was a pretty crazy couple of weeks.
Yeah, it certainly was. And, I think one of the things that I have learned, and it's not just a City thing, but we're very quick to react. I think one of the things that I've noticed is, the connection that City fans seem to have with keepers over the years, where, they seem to be, I say, like a dime a dozen. But I remember, the signing of Jakupovic, and how, he was a player who certainly had absolutely no real resonance with the fans at all, and then went through a patch. And then when he took that contract to Leicester, everyone was, absolutely aggrieved and thinking we've lost one of our favorite sons. And I can think of multiple keepers where that's kind of been the case. We do get very attached as fans, and I think management is exactly the same. And so, when Andy Dawson took up that kind of caretaker appointment, as soon as there was a little bit of a kind of a positive feel and a couple of positive results under Dawson, straight away the gear shifted to, oh, well, we definitely need Dawson as our new manager. He's someone who can, guide the club through this phase. And that, yeah, as you said, the timing of it with Shota was an interesting one. When it happened, and as you said, was it one of those things that was far too long in the making? Like, did we have to wait much further than we probably should have? And for mine, I look at it from this side. I don't think Andy Dawson was ready to necessarily be the manager at the helm. But what I find interesting about hearing myself say that out loud is, Liam Rosenior is Andy Dawson's junior, as far as in age goes. But
I've had that thought before.
Yeah, but Rosenior just, there's something about him as a manager. You've got, like, Liam Rosenior as a player was fantastic, as was Andy Dawson in his own right. But there's a confidence and a real, I want to say, intensity with the way Liam Rosenior manages. Like, he really instills that belief, and does just seem to have that really deep kind of football mind, where he seems to think and be curious, and just seems like a real student of the game. And so when I saw Rosenior take over and started to listen to the belief that he had in the press conferences, and the way that he spoke about his vision for the club, there was something about that gave me a real sense of assurance. And I've got to say that after watching the second half of the season and the control that he's had, I've really bought into his philosophy, and think that he has a really bright future in management. I hope that's with City. I hope that the results start to come sooner rather than later for us. But I think, irrespective of that, I think he is an incredible manager and has a very bright future ahead.
Yeah, one thing I had been considering, just before we move on to the retention list that was released a couple of weeks ago as well, um, you know, because there's such a hard way to phrase it without it sounding like a negative, because it's definitely not meant to be. But I do wonder what the line is, or what the expectation is for Rosenior for next season. Where I think, by and large, to your point about City fans and supporting the manager, everyone wants Rosenior to succeed. Everyone is behind him, and everyone is supporting him. I wonder what the threshold is for that support to waver, and I hope it's not something that we have to see next season. But yeah, it'll be a curious situation, because I think, having had our most successful period under Bruce, which was that stable managerial tenure of 4 years or whatever it was, I think as a City fan, I'm quite happy to have a long-term manager in place. I don't like the chopping and changing, and the changing of the identity of the team all too often. So I'd love to see Rosenior be a success, just like you. So I think it's going to be a really interesting season next year to see how he goes. But yeah, to your point about Dawson, I mean, there was an interview with him recently where he was talking about learning a lot from Rosenior, and you think, it wasn't that long ago. Well, when they were playing in the City side together, that Dawson is still Rosenior's senior, and was probably teaching Rosenior a lot of craftsmanship as being a fullback. So it's kind of funny how those roles reverse a bit. But talking about a different left back, we did have our retention list come out, and it was unfortunately with the news that Callum Elder was leaving the club, which, as Aussies, I guess we're probably a bit upset with. We haven't gone without an Australian at the club since before Jackson Irvine joined the club, so it's been a pretty continuous streak for about, what's that now? It must be about 6 or 7 years. With Doherty, Coyle having their options triggered, so they've got year extensions on their deals, and Alfie Jones getting a new, essentially 4-year deal. So what did you make of all those moves, I suppose?
I guess the Coyle was the real surprising one for me, and not in the sense that I think that Louis Coyle is a poor player by any stretch. I did expect Elder to be moved on by the club, and mainly because there'd been whispers about it for quite some time. If you even cast your mind back to the start of this season, he was spotted chatting in the coffee shop to, I can't remember who it was at the time, but the speculation of Callum Elder being moved out, has been around for quite some time. And the fact that he didn't play, I guess, as much of an integral role in this championship campaign as we've seen in the past, I really did expect that. Now, Louis Coyle to me is someone who I do believe out and out that the championship is his absolute ceiling. I know that we've, seen him score some screamer goals in the past, and I know that he's all intensity. Like, he is a player that gives his all, and you can never really question his attitude on the pitch. I do think that certainly if City were ever to get Premier League status, I'd be very, very hard pressed to see how Louis Coyle would be able to turn up and play in the top flight of English football. And that's no disrespect to him. I just think that he's more of a League One player, kind of tops, and an okay championship player. So I would suspect that Louis Coyle's role next season is going to be one that's more of a role player. I do expect us to probably get someone who will, start in that left back position, but I suspect that he probably didn't have the biggest contract as far as wages go, and he is a player who can certainly do a job, apart from the fact that he is a bit of a hometown hero and does certainly care about the club. So whilst it surprises me, I see the benefit in it. I thought the Alfie Jones contract extension was very welcome news. I know that we talked, I think it was last week, about how surprised we were that he ended up being the kind of runaway, as far as the plaudits go, getting the City's player of the season. And that was somewhat shocking, but also I guess he had a solid season. So I think that, he is one that is a huge addition, especially because if, he were to be, linked with any other clubs, it would come with a suitable transfer fee, which, you see a lot of clubs do that now, make those long-term investments, and then if anyone does come in, then they have to pay big dollars. So I thought that was a great astute piece of business. And also the last one is Doherty. Again, Doherty was as an incredible player in League One. I think he's a good championship player, but he is someone who we did see play a different role this season. And as much as I would have or wouldn't have been surprised to see him moved on, I do think he is someone that certainly is an important part of the squad. Knowing what he is capable of.
Yeah, although I will say with Doc, my sense with him is more that it might be that we've triggered the 1-year option so that we can get some sort of fee for him and that he will move on. Whereas Coyle might be that we might give him like a 2 or 3 year deal as like a, like you said, it's almost like a squad player role, and more there for that experience and leadership, I suppose. But I wouldn't be surprised to see Doc move maybe to Scotland or, to a Rotherham or something like that. But I guess we'll see how that one goes. We'll talk now about, so we obviously had our preseason predictions for a few different categories, and we'll use that as a sort of launching pad for a bit of a discussion about some different factors from the season as it went on. And I'll start with top goal scorer, and you and I were clearly both on the money because we both went with Estupiñán to be top goal scorer, and he was with 13 goals. We sort of talked about it earlier, but he the way he hit the ground running as a City player. I know we had our flashback episode last week where we were talking about Darman scoring 3 or 4 goals, I think, in a patch of games to almost keep us up that season under Steve Bruce. This was to even more of an extent. I think it was 7 goals in his first 6 games or something like that. I can't recall too many other City players starting their City careers as well as he did.
No, absolutely. And, as far as the pre-match, pre-season predictions, you and I could have almost collected our bet tickets early doors by Christmas with the way that he started. He led the championship goal scoring race for quite some time as well. And we thought we'd, discovered the next real City legacy item, but injury kind of did get in the way of that. Also, kind of, I guess we realised the limits of Oscar as a striker in the championship. That there are games where because of the type of striker he is, he's not necessarily running in behind. He doesn't necessarily create too much on his own, apart from the fact that he just has incredible finishing on his day, but doesn't throws himself about, and a lot of those goals, if you go back and look at them, was from exactly that. It was just that extra little bit of effort. And one thing that I will say is, if you do remember the patch of goal scoring that that he did return at the start of the season, it was when Benjamin Tete was fit and playing up top alongside him. And I do kind of think, on reflection, that not only did Oscar have a couple of injury woes of his own, but the fact that Benjamin Tete got injured, I think, had a large part to do with, the halt in Oscar's prolific goal scoring run. And if we had have seen those two, spend more time together on the pitch, I think that, the 13 goals could have certainly been more. So I'm not upset looking back now that was my, preseason prediction for Player of the Year. And, I think that he is one to watch for the future, particularly if he is able to be paired with Benjamin Tete and see if they can strike up, a partnership after the promise they did show.
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, Tete's injury definitely coincided with Oscar's dip in form. I'm actually just surprised he didn't score a few more goals and get to the 20-goal mark, because he hit 11 or 12 goals almost halfway through the season, and you'd think from there he'd be able to go on to get the 20 goals, as you said as well. I mean, he had his own injuries to deal with, that ankle injury that flared up late in the season, or perhaps more the case that we just felt that we didn't need to risk him late in the season, so we thought we'd just get him right. Was disappointing, but hopefully a fully fit Oscar and Tete next season can really sort of lead the line quite effectively for City, which would be great to see. As for most improved player, I said Tufan and you said Greaves, and I actually reckon that's not a bad shout for either of them. I think both of them showed, well, Greaves, I guess I'd say Greaves, it was more the fact that he showed his flexibility with developing into a left wing back or left back, which we hadn't really seen in him before. So I don't know if you'd call that most improved, or he just added another string to his bow, which was really impressive to see. And I think if I'm not mistaken, did he win Best Young Player at the awards? I might look that up while we talk. But then Tufan certainly as well. I think he really improved as the season went on. His fitness levels, his ability to run out games and his ability to impact on games as well was fantastic, and obviously scored quite a few goals as well. So a really impressive debut season for him.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, reading that before we went to air again, that when you picked Tufan, I was like, it's an incredible shout because, if you think about the player he was, although he did actually, start with a pretty positive return. I know that there was that goal at Burnley that just looked like he was, on a kind of different level. And towards the end of the season too, certainly as his fitness improved, he looked a lot more in shape, and the influence that he seemed to have on games was incredible. I guess, in hindsight, the one person who I would probably, say we didn't pick because they were such an underdog and probably speaks as to how great their season was Regan Slatter. That's probably the most improved player from the bunch. But as you mentioned, Graves, I was like, it's an interesting one because he did, as you said, he showed a lot more versatility, and there were patches where he was clearly out of form. But overall, across the stretch of the 46 games, he's certainly a player who is moving in the right direction.
Yeah, and then I looked it up, and he did win Young Player of the Season as well. So clearly a very positive reflection on his season. But yeah, good shout actually on Slater as well as probably the overall most improved player in that sense as well. And then the last one was best summer signing, and I said Seri, you said Oscar. We sort of already touched on. Obviously, Oscar's goal scoring was really impressive. Seri was probably more one that we knew what to expect when he came in, and he was probably another one that was probably a bit slow to get going. He had a few injury issues at the start of the season as well. Obviously scored the winning goal against Bristol City on the opening day, though, which was a pretty good start to his City career. But the way he settled into the season, I thought he was a really outstanding signing for us.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that we really saw the kind of fruits of the quality of player Seri is towards the back end of the season. I think he's a player that, this will sound ludicrous, but he's a player that is so good as far as his, delivery, finding balls, looking for passes that kind of aren't there. It's almost like players had to adjust to his wavelength and the runs that are expected for him to find you probably aren't always the most natural runs in a City team where, as you said, like we haven't necessarily had the strongest identity, and maybe that's through management, maybe it's through the players that we've signed, because we have languished in the lower leagues. And I think Seri is much more kind of accustomed to that real fluent ball on a string kind of play. And I think that was something that was probably difficult for him to to warm up to, and the players certainly weren't kind of looking for the same things that he were. And I think we definitely saw that towards the end. And so, yeah, look, I'm really interested to see what to make of Seri next year, and see if that, the time that he has played on pitch and the chemistry that's been developed, if, we do see the fruits of that in a more of a long-term thing rather than, he hit the ground running in his first season.
Yeah, no doubt. And then I guess the last thing we'll talk about, so we'll do our player of the season reveal in the second half of this episode. So we've already tallied all the votes. Mike, we were originally going to do an episode reflecting on that final game against Luton. So I did get votes from Mike to tally into our player of the season, but we didn't end up going ahead with that episode just because there wasn't a whole lot to fill that with. But we'll do that in the second half of this episode. But just to round off this half, I'll get you to reflect on what can you think of what your favourite game of the season was. I've sort of thrown up a few here as obviously Bristol City opening day as a perfect sort of start with that last minute goal. The 4-4 with Sunderland, I mean, you wouldn't normally consider a draw as one of the best games of the season, but I thought that was the way, especially the way that finished with Tufan slotting the penalty to level it up, I thought was a pretty thrilling game. And then I've actually gone with the 3-2 win over Cardiff as my favourite game, with the two goals from Slater within a couple of minutes of each other to completely flip the script in that game. That was probably my game of the season.
Yeah, interesting. And I can kind of see why. I think that was probably, as far as excitement. We're not used to grabbing last kind of ditch winners and being incredibly excited by it. But it was such an unlikely kind of goal scorer for Slatter to have the game that he did and then pop up. Like, and no disrespect to him, it was just it was something that you could not have, even the most devout City fan would not have predicted that. So yeah, that was fun. One that sticks out to me was actually the 4-1 win against Wigan away. And that was it came after a pretty interesting patch. We talked about the kind of dip in form. I'm pretty sure we'd had like a couple of draws and we had a narrow victory against Birmingham away, and then we beat Wigan.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so
convincingly.
we had the 3 draws with Watford, Sunderland, and Blackpool, and I think that's right around that patch where you were saying we were right on the edge of the relegation zone, and there was probably a bit of murmuring about our form and how we were looking, and then that win against Birmingham, and then the smashing of Wigan.
Yeah, it was just. I mean, any game where you put 4 goals on the board. I remember it was a really like kind of late flurry. It was actually
Oscar
the game up.
Tyler Smith getting a double as well.
That's right. So yeah, we scored early and looked rather comfortable, and then Wigan equalised, and then Oscar and Tyler Smith got a double in the 85th and 91st. And I just remember that being such a kind of coming of age game for us, because we were under pressure and it hadn't been exactly the most prolific patch of points, and we'd seen our position on the ladder kind of continue to head south and then maybe stabilize with a few draws. But that 3 points I remember being huge at the time, and to win in such a convincing way, it stood out to me. And it was kind of when I really believed that realistically relegation probably wasn't going to happen.
Yeah, no, that's a great shout. I hadn't considered that one, but it brings back the memories now. Tyler Smith bagging a double late in that one was a rarity, but it was a very welcome one as well. Hey, look, well, as we wrap this up, then I guess any general reflections, or perhaps in these very early stages, things to look forward to for next season. I mean, I guess we've got the big Yorkshire derby against Leeds back. We've also got the big Yorkshire derby against Sheff Wednesday back, which after 2016 is always a bit of a fun one as well. Is there any particular teams you're looking forward to playing? Anything that you're looking forward to for next season, or just reflections on the season we've just had?
Yeah, look, I'm really interested to see what happens under Rosignol over a longer period of time. And I know that sounds like a very cliche comment, but the signs really did, point towards a promising season next year. Well, I shouldn't say next year, in the next few months. But I think it just the way that, as I said, he really started to stamp an identity. I think that the playing group that we've currently got seem to have developed a really strong trust and respect for him. And then obviously, like every season, I'll be very interested to see what players come in, what additions we make, and then to see if there's no reason why we can't see some of those partnerships and the playing chemistry in the current group continue. So look, I'll be very fascinated. I think that the club's heading in the right direction. I think we would have taken a lot away from this season. The other thing that I will say is I'm really glad that Everton didn't get relegated from a fan's perspective, not because I wouldn't have liked the idea of Everton in the Championship. I just think that anytime a club that big comes down, the likelihood of them bouncing back up is quite significant, and I think that would have made the promotion race for everyone, much more significantly difficult. And that's no disrespect to Leicester, Sunderland, and no less than Leeds as well. But I just think that Everton probably are a club that would be much more fearful, I guess, as far as that bounce back up ability, if that's a word.
Yeah, I definitely had the same thoughts, and I think I look at Leeds and I look at Leicester, and I think that they'll have a lot of turnover in their squads, and obviously don't know who their managers will be. I think it's interesting with Southampton with already, I mean, I don't think they've made it official yet, but Russell Martin going there from Swansea, I think has them best placed to be almost that Burnley-esque team of coming in, having that really attacking sort of, I guess, identity, but also having the personnel to do that. It'll be interesting, for example, Nathan Teller, who's just been on loan at Burnley, is actually a Southampton player. So whether he goes to Burnley permanently or he goes back to Southampton, I can't see him going back to Southampton, but maybe he does. But they're definitely the ones that I've got my eyes on as probably the biggest threat from the relegated teams. But yeah, certainly if Everton had come down, that's a pretty big club. And you sort of think of the seasons where West Ham and Newcastle were in the Championship and they just sort of ran away with the division. So you certainly want to give yourselves as much opportunity as possible to challenge for that top 2 or top 6. And so I think the 3 that came down is probably the best we could hope for in that sense. Yeah, look, I'm really excited to see what players we start to bring in. As you say, I mean, we're sitting here at the end of May. You would imagine this time next month we'll already have a couple of signings in the building. It sounds like we want to get business done pretty early, and we'll be gearing up for pre-season. So it comes around pretty quickly. So we'll, as a podcast, we'll enjoy the month off before we're back at it, gearing up for the new season in just over a month or 6 weeks, I guess. So in saying that, thank you for joining me for this one, Logan.
Yeah, my pleasure, Alex.
No problem. And thank you everyone for listening in. As you finish watching this one, the second half of this review with the other boys from the podcast will be available as well, where we'll also reveal our player of the season. So go check that one out when you can. But otherwise, thank you for listening.